Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the university and the campus and the Wesleyan School of Public Affairs, I want to welcome you to this event where we celebrate the life and career of Zeke Hasenfeld, who is our colleague and friend for, including his emeritus years, almost 32 years at UCLA. Zeke began his career at the University of Michigan before he joined us. I didn't have the pleasure of serving as dean while Zeke was still active on the faculty, but he actually did come to see me on a couple of occasions. And each time we talked about things that were of particular interest to him, but to be perfectly honest with you, I think the main reason he came to see me was to make sure that the Department of Social Welfare would be okay. He wanted to make sure that I was going to do right by them. And I hope I reassured him. Academics are a strange group of people. We have beliefs about ourselves and hopes for ourselves that I think are probably, well, many are like everyone else, but there are a few that set us apart. And the things that set us apart is our burning desire to say something that has a lasting impact, to train someone who has a lasting impact. And because we're human beings, it'd be nice if someone noticed that. It's fair to say that Zeke accomplished all of these. Upon his death, the Journal of Human Service Organizations, which is the field that he wrote in most deeply, had an obituary that really captured what Zeke meant both to his field of study and to the people who work in it. If we want to know if Zeke said something that had a lasting impact, the editorial board wrote, and I quote, "Professor Hasenfeld's career was the embodiment of the very best social work scholarship, rigorous, theoretically grounded, and in pursuit of clues that could help improve social work practice, reduce inequality, and promote empowerment." It goes on in detail to explain the important contribution of his first paper, People Processing Organizations, and describes his body of work as revolutionary. Zeke Hasenfeld, quote, took a political economy approach to studying organizations, noting that they are situated in a complex political, economic, and moral environment that create high levels of uncertainty. He combined this insight with the notion that human service organizations carry out work that is both moral and gendered, and to demonstrate that the primary activity of human service organizations is maintaining their own legitimacy. I hope that at the end of my career, I can look back on an impact that Zeke Hasenfeld's colleagues believe he had. And the editorial board's note was very impressive in its valedictory. The second thing I want to point out is that Zeke Hasenfeld did in fact train folks who had a lasting impact. Again, quoting from the obituary, "The importance of Hasenfeld's work in shaping the field and generating its most important questions cannot be overstated. Many of us on the editorial board have had our own research shaped by his thinking, either as students, mentees, or colleagues. He will be deeply missed." And finally, noting our human frailties as academics, we like to be noticed for the work that we do. Zeke Hasenfeld was awarded the Society for Social Work and Research Distinguished Career Achievement Award in 2011. And he was inducted as a Fellow of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare in 2013. In the end, we can look back on Zeke Hasenfeld's life, and instead of me offering you solely condolences today, I can offer you a bit of congratulations, because he met our standard. He said things that mattered in shaping his field and in shaping the world. He trained and mentored people who felt inspired by his efforts, and Zeke needs to know we noticed. Welcome to this event. I'm going to turn the dais over to Professor Laura Abrams, the chair of the Department of Social Welfare, who will take us through the program.
Thank you so much, Dean Segura, and it's just, this is a lovely day to celebrate our friend, our colleague, our mentor, our family member, Professor Zeke Hasenfeld. We have invited a few folks to say some words, people who work closely with Zeke, and so we're going to start with Professor Emeritus Ted Benjamin.
Good morning. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for the opportunity to remember Zeke. He was a presence in my professional life, and I can't believe I'm saying this, for close to half a century, and a friend for a quarter century. I shall continue to miss him. I met Zeke in Ann Arbor when I was a new graduate student at the University of Michigan. He was completing the PhD program and would soon join the faculty there. Years later, after we both moved to California, he called me from UCLA to urge me to apply for a faculty position here. I resisted moving from San Francisco, but Zeke persisted with phone calls, as he did so often, and helped pave the way for my hiring. I've always been grateful to him for that. Zeke also played a prominent role in recruiting others to UCLA. I recently visited with Stuart Kirk at his home in Santa Fe. Stuart, who along with Zeke achieved the lofty status of distinguished professor at UCLA, told a story similar to my own. His about Zeke's influence on Stuart's decision to leave Columbia and come to UCLA. Stuart had had an unpleasant experience visiting the campus earlier. Our deans knew that when there was a pivotal point in recruiting senior faculty to social welfare, it was time to enlist Zeke. Zeke persuaded Stuart that things had changed here. Stuart listened, and he recently retired after a satisfying and productive 20 years at UCLA. Zeke and I became much better acquainted when I arrived in Los Angeles in the early 90s. Zeke and Helen were the first to invite us to their home for dinner, something I especially appreciated. At work, Zeke was not only the prominent scholar we all knew him to be, but also a colleague who seemed to be on the honorable side each time in those debates and skirmishes that seemed to characterize academic programs everywhere. Even better, he proved to be a charming and intensely interesting friend who loved to talk about books, fiction and nonfiction, who enjoyed the arts, and who cared deeply about good food. It was always a treat to sit down with him, at least when you were not asking him to accept some tedious administrative assignment. Deans and department chairs learned to be selective when they went to Zeke. We went to him when we needed someone to handle a particularly difficult assignment, who was both senior and widely regarded for his toughness and fairness. We called on Zeke because his voice was truly authoritative and well respected. The last time I saw Zeke and Eve, we crossed paths at the theater, and he had that big smile and seemingly indomitable spirit, even as I saw him in a wheelchair for the first time. I didn't know that would be the last time, and it's hard to believe that he's gone. but I will relish the memories of him and truly miss him. Thanks.
Thank you, Ted. Next, we'll hear from another long-term colleague, Professor Fernando Torres.
Thank you, Laura, and thanks to all who invited me and give me the honor to speak on behalf of a dear colleague and a good friend. Zeke was part of my life in 3 different phases. The first phase, I did not know him personally. I was a graduate student at Brandeis University at the Haller School, young, full of vim and vigor, active with the farm workers and wanting to change the world, and but not grasping how you connect community activism, labor organizing, and influencing formal organizations, large and small, from different sectors. It just couldn't understand how you bring it all together. Fortunately, I had a professor, Roland Warren, who introduced me to something that was relatively new to me then, organizational theory. And he recommended someone I did not know, a Zeke Hasenfeld from Michigan, who had written a book on human service organization. And it was like the light came on. Suddenly I had a conceptual framework to connect community organizing, labor movements, small and large complex organization. And I read everything I could from this gentleman from Michigan. The second phase was when I was recruited to UCLA and I got to meet the guy, the man, the icon. And he was just a few doors down from me, our offices close to each other. And what a treat to interact, to talk about politics, talk about ethnic change in Los Angeles, and just become very good colleagues and over time friends. The third phase, which I will always be indebted to him, was learning from him how to age gracefully with a disability. He and I shared the same life circumstance. Polio survivors, aging, facing the onset of what is known as post-polio syndrome, which essentially reduces your mobility and creates additional challenges in life. Zeke showed me how to accept and adapt gracefully to those life changes. As his mobility limitations increased and he had to use braces and crutches and ultimately a wheelchair, he never complained. He stayed in the game. He stayed involved. And I talked to him just a month or 2 before he passed away because I wanted to get together with him. He had acquired a wonderful new motorized scooter. And I wanted to try it out because I knew that's just the way it goes with this particular age of disability. He asked me, Fernando, wait, I'm going through some treatments. Let's get together and you can try my motorized scooter when I'm able to use it again. I never had that opportunity. He passed away. But this is all to say that Zeke exemplified a life well lived, aging gracefully with life's circumstances, never complaining, making the most of all the great good fortune that he had. I miss him, not just because of all the great things he did and being my colleague, but I miss my counselor, my mentor, as I now move through the same path he's going to. Anyways, a wonderful guy, miss him, and what a wonderful role model. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fernando. You moved us. We're now here from Professor Emerita Aurora Jackson.
I'm not going to speak as long as others of you have spoken, because I didn't know Zeke as long as many of you knew him. But I have to tell you, I loved him. I never told that to him, but I loved him. He was a person I discussed my thoughts and feelings with about his work, my work, poverty, the state of the world, the state of our school, our wishes for our students, and what we would do in retirement. I was very scared to retire, but he agreed with me it was time. And I would be okay. We spent many hours over lunch, because we did lunch many times. We spent many hours over lunch and talked about things both important to us and actually unimportant to us. We also gossiped. And that was fun. He enjoyed gossiping, as did I. He didn't mince words, as I don't. And actually the last email I shared with Zeke was a few days before he died. I sent him an article I had written that at that point was in press. It's now published, and I was very proud of, and I wanted to discuss it with him. And I was moving on to another article, which I wanted to discuss with him. Well, that didn't happen, because I wanted to have lunch with him, but he died. But one of the last things he said to me was that his life in retirement was good, and that he was looking forward to continuing to do the things he loved. And he told me that I would be okay too, because this is also about me. He was such a special person. I will miss him, and I think I shouldn't finish here without saying a little bit about his scholarship. I read Zeke's work on human service organizations early in my career. I was fascinated by his conceptualization of the work of human subjects organizations as moral work. When I first introduced my students to his work on organizations at Columbia University, I was struck by the beauty and eloquence of his writing on human subjects organizations and the production of moral categories. I wondered who this man was. He wrote about how human service organizations should function and how they often do function. That they should strive to embrace values that embrace human dignity, counter discrimination and social stigma, and deliver services that reduce suffering and social inequality. A recurrent theme throughout his work is the notion that human service organizations should treat clients as subjects who work with, and to be involved in the decisions concerning their needs and desires rather than objects to work on. And that the receipt of services should not be made contingent on the acceptance of self-blame. Zeke believes very strongly in the importance of human dignity, as do I. His relations with his students and with his colleagues reflected this. I asked Eve Garrow, was there anything that she wanted me to impart about Zeke when I spoke with him today? She wanted me to talk about what he thought about people, and what he thought about the poor, and what he thought about disadvantaged populations, and what he tried to do in his life. And I've attempted to do that. And I'll say in closing that Zeke was chair of the search committee that brought me to UCLA. As I said, I never told him, but I loved him, and I will miss him greatly.
were students of Zeke, PhD students. Some of you flew here from other parts of the country. And we all know that Zeke he chose his students carefully, shall we say. He really liked to work with students who were able to dig in theoretically and be challenged and be open to the type of philosophy and critical thinking that he so embodied. One of those students here is going to speak now, which is our newly minted Dr. Sarah Tirana.
Hello, everyone. So I distinctly remember the first time I met Zeke, as I was quite nervous. I knew that Zeke was a renowned scholar, so accomplished in the field of social work scholarship that he was known by his first name alone. And I was a potential doctoral student, hoping to have an opportunity to work with him. And I remember leaving our first conversation thinking, I should have been taking notes. You know, this was way over my head. And when I think about the ways in which Zeke has shaped the field of human service organizations, bringing this much needed focus to social work, and the way he shaped my own thinking on these topics, I feel so much gratitude that he always found time to mentor me as a student. And he always made time no matter what, even to the very end. His response of reading drafts of papers, of emails, we spent a lot of time on Skype or FaceTime having these conversations. He always had time for me and for his students. And as Zeke mentored and advised me, he really was my greatest advocate. He always pushed me to think more about the structural causes of social inequality, to ground our research on human service organizations in theory, and to integrate and to interrogate the assumptions of these dominant ideologies, particularly as they related to understanding the experiences of oppressed populations. He always kept the thought of how best to meet clients' needs by bringing in the reality, how many of you talked about that this work was moral, it was gendered, and the importance of legitimacy and power, and how to really improve social work practice. Even after he retired, he continued to make valuable contributions to the field. I remember sitting in his office and the mail was delivered, and he opened up a package and he remarked, "Oh, here's the publisher just sent me an author copy of another book that he had just written." And this was maybe a year or two ago. So, and as Zeke's final student at UCLA, it was bittersweet, as I wrapped up my final time in the doctoral program, and while I was thrilled to have graduated, and I will say that most of Zeke's students, I think we all spent a solid 7 years in the program. I was also, deeply saddened that my mentor could not share the stage with me on graduation day, and I will always be in awe by what Zeke accomplished over his long and storied career, and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to work with him. He left an indelible mark on my scholarship, and I'll miss him dearly. And I'll say that even many times when I would sit in his office, he would talk about his granddaughters and how important they were, and the decisions they were doing, and what, with the Claremont schools and going on that forth, or what the latest activities were. He loved you dearly, and and he was just so active even towards the end. Like I said, I was talking with him a few days before he passed away, and even at the end, he was just always advocating for social justice and what was best and what was right. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to now call up Thomas Brock, who I have not met, but I know he flew here from New York and wanted to say a few words.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. So, next to our parents, I think our teachers and professors are often the most impactful people in our lives. And Zeke Hasenfeld was certainly one of the most impactful people in my life. He had a profound influence on my development as a young researcher and continued to be a role model, a mentor, and friend for more than 25 years. Zeke and I met in September 1987 when I came to UCLA to pursue a doctorate in social welfare. Zeke actually was a new arrival as well, having only recently moved with his family from Ann Arbor to Los Angeles. And as you've already heard, Zeke had a highly successful career at the University of Michigan. And he always spoke about his experiences in Michigan with a certain amount of loyalty and affection. But Zeke loved LA, and he loved UCLA. I think, quite honestly, the good weather had a lot to do with it. He would delight in calling his friends in Michigan, around February or so, and describe the birds and the flowers outside his window and say, "What does your window view look like today?" But more than that, Zeke really loved the diversity and the vibrancy of Southern California and of UCLA. He and his wife, Helen, loved the museums, the movies, the restaurants. They kept up a very active social life. More than once, Zeke told me that he had never lived in a place that was so open and inviting to new people and new ideas as Los Angeles. At the time I started at UCLA, welfare reform was a very hot topic in public policy. The Reagan-Bush years had unleashed a torrent of state-run welfare reform programs, including here in California, what was known as the Greater Avenues for Independence, or GAIN program. As welfare reform programs went, GAIN was relatively well funded, and it was certainly more of a liberal version of welfare reform than you saw in a lot of other parts of the country, with a pretty heavy emphasis on education and training and childcare and other services deemed necessary to help welfare recipients, mostly young women with children, prepare for and move into the labor market. So Zeke and I shared an interest in understanding how this new law would be implemented, whether services would be delivered as intended, and whether it would lead to the kinds of improvements in young women's lives and their children's lives as was promised. So together we embarked on an ambitious study of welfare reform in Los Angeles County. We met with county officials, we interviewed and visited a number of social service providers throughout the county, and ultimately with Dale Weaver here, produced a report documenting how many of the high-minded goals of welfare reform got hijacked through various organizational and political agendas, resulting in limited services of value to people in need. Looking back at this time, I'm struck by the extraordinary opportunity that I had to work so closely with Zeke on this important study. I also recall his incredible generosity as a teacher, as a professor. He was generous with his time. He truly had an open door policy and was willing to sit down for extended conversations about the articles I was reading, the field research that I was doing, and the dissertation I was drafting and redrafting and redrafting. I would also say Zeke was very generous with his contacts, introducing me to welfare rights advocates, to community people, to research scholars that he thought I should know. And finally, as many of you who work with Zeke know, Zeke was generous about his opinions. If your work did not rise to his standards, he let you know it. But on that rare occasion when Zeke told you your work was excellent, you really knew you had achieved something. After I left UCLA, Zeke continued to write extensively about welfare reform, most often with his colleague Joel Handler at the law school. Much of their work had a philosophical or a moral dimension, calling into question why it is that our society so often marginalizes or even criminalizes people who are poor, rather than giving them the help that they need and the opportunities they deserve to pursue their life goals without threat of sanction or other penalty. I pursued a career that was more focused on applied research, really in the interest of trying to improve welfare and other social service and education programs. I think Zeke honestly believed that the work I engaged in post-UCLA was a bit of a lost cause, because for him, the moral underpinnings of these programs was always suspect. But I would say as well, I think Zeke was always a bit disappointed that I didn't follow his footsteps and pursue a more traditional academic career. But we stayed in contact, we read and we cited each other's work, we shared news of our families and our personal lives, and I never doubted Zeke's concern for me as a friend and former student, even if my career path did not fully meet his expectations. I last had the opportunity to see Zeke only about a week before his death, And I'm struck by how many of you seem to have had contact with him during that period, which actually makes me very happy. I happened to be in Southern California for a meeting, and we had arranged for me to drop by his apartment to take him out to dinner. When I got there, quite honestly, he did not look well. He was disheveled in a way that was not typical for Zeke. He clearly was weak. He told me he had lost about 30 pounds. He did not have the energy to go out to a restaurant. And the most that I could do for him on that visit was to go out and fetch a piece of cheesecake at a local market that he said he wanted. So I brought it back and watched him eat that slice of cheesecake. But when we got talking about his work, his eyes lit up, he sat up straight, he got animated once again. He'd been working on a study of the homeless in downtown Los Angeles, and he was waiting for his co-author, Eve Garrow, to send him the manuscript for final editing so that they could get it to a publisher. He was so determined to see that book through that honestly I left his apartment feeling quite confident I would see him again on my next visit, despite his physical condition. That, of course, was not meant to be. But I cherish the fact that my last memories of Zeke are seeing him fired up about his work, calling attention to the moral injustice of homelessness, and the need for a more enlightened approach to services that reflect the dignity of all persons.
And now we'll hear a few words from Michal Marbarak, a professor of social work at USC.
Good morning. Like many here, I knew of Zeke before I first met him. So it was with much trepidation that I approached our first meeting as colleagues when I arrived to Los Angeles to join the faculty at USC. To my surprise and relief, he was very friendly and down to earth from the first moment of our meeting. We shared a common interest in organizational science, and we were the only Israelis in social work academia in our respective universities. So we formed a bond immediately. Zeke was very generous with advice and mentoring when I was forging my way as a new assistant professor. We created a little tradition of having breakfast once a semester just to chat about common interests. We crossed the big divide of our respective institutions, UCLA and USC, by meeting in a neutral territory, a little cafe on neither campus. We communicated in Hebrewish, a funny combination of Hebrew and English, because our professional language was English, so the terms were in English, but the sentences were in Hebrew. And Zeke came to my rescue when I needed one final chapter for my first book on social services in the workplace. He pulled an unpublished article from his proverbial drawer and gave it to me. It was a gift that I cherished. The paper was the first to critically examine the research on welfare-to-work programs that were very popular at the time. These programs were part of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act signed by President Clinton. Yet, instead of praising the act, like most politicians and many authors at the time, he warned against the transformation of welfare departments into employment agencies. Courageously, he went against the mainstream of popular tribute to the act and called it a highly flawed policy. Examining the needs of diverse welfare recipient populations, he proclaimed that social services should be made available and accessible to poor single mothers and welfare recipients. They should be voluntary and free of sanctions, and most importantly, they should provide services that address concrete, real needs. This approach characterized with Zeke's entire body of work: evidence-based, honest, practical, with integrity, and with attention to real human needs. I'm grateful to Zeke for his mentorship and collegiality through the years. In honor of Zeke and our Hebrewish communication, I would like to end with a short poem by the founding father of Israeli poetry, Chaim Nachman Bialik. It's very short. I'll read first in Hebrew and then in English. אחרי מותי ספדו ככה לי, היה איש וראו איננו עוד. קודם זמנו מת האיש הזה, ושירת חייו באמצע נפסקה. וצר עוד מזמור אחד היה לו, והנה אבד המזמור לעד. After my death, say this, there was a man, and look, he is no more. He died before his time. The music of his life suddenly stopped. Such a deep sorrow. There was one more poem in him, but now the poem is lost forever. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his work and inspiration be an inspiration to scholars and practitioners, and may his memory be a blessing to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've heard from many colleagues from around the world and the country, and now we will hear some words of remembrance from one of Zeke's daughters, Rena Garland.
Good morning. The tears have started. Thank you, Michal. It was beautiful. As Laura introduced, I'm Rena Garland. I'm Zeke's daughter. I'm here with my mom, Helen Hasenfeld, my husband, Glenn Garland, and our daughter, Zeke's granddaughter, Summer Garland, who's missing school today to honor her grandpops. Unfortunately, my sister Rachel and her family couldn't be here today, but they sent their gratitude. And to all of you for this remembrance of our father. I'm just going to get some formalities out of the way. I'd like to start by thanking UCLA, the Luskin School, and the Department of Social Welfare for hosting this beautiful event. I'd like to acknowledge Shelley Brooks for her planning and her coordination, and especially Laura Abrams for her warmth and kindness and patience and support that she's shown to our family during this time. The department also sent gorgeous flowers to the very small memorial that we had for my dad after he passed. And I took some of them home afterwards and put them all throughout my home. And they were beautiful and life-affirming and really helpful to me during that time. So thank you so much for that. I think it's especially fitting that you chose this spot here by the ocean to honor my dad. He grew up by the sea in Tel Aviv and swam regularly in the Mediterranean. When he was in Michigan, he sailed on the lakes quite regularly. And here at UCLA, he swam at the UCLA Rec Center almost every day. He loved the water, so this site is very appropriate for him, and I'm sure he would have been thrilled. I'd like to thank all of the people who traveled long distances to be here. We have someone from Japan, New York. It's pretty amazing, and I'm really grateful to everyone who's spoken about him so far, and looking forward to hearing what else there is in the program. My dad didn't like a lot of hoopla, at least that's what he told me, but I'm really grateful for your recognition of him and his contributions, and it makes me really proud that he was my dad. To be honest with you, I never really understood what my dad did. Every once in a while, I would ask him to explain it to me, and after a couple of sentences, I'd kind of zone out. I think this continued. I'm in my 50s. I'm still not quite sure what he did, but I feel a little bit more enlightened today after hearing what you've shared. So thank you all for that. What I do know is that my dad absolutely loved his work. He was extremely passionate about what he did, and it was one of the driving forces of his life till the very end. It was his identity, and I know it gave deep meaning, richness, and fulfillment to his life. He loved his students, he loved his research, and he loved writing books and journal articles. He was not always the easiest of personalities. He demanded as much from others as he did from himself, but he was generous with his time and his knowledge, and it gave him tremendous pleasure to mentor his students and watch them launch their careers. He always felt so proud to work at the University of Michigan and at UCLA, and it was his heartfelt mission to help make these programs as strong as possible. He was fortunate enough to travel all over the world for his work, and I remember the excitement we all felt when one of his first books was translated into a foreign language. Above all, I believe my father was driven to make a difference in the world, and I hope his work is a testament to that. I hope that he's created a legacy that will outlast him and continue to influence the field of social work for some time. We as a family miss him and are grateful to you for acknowledging his professional achievements and the personal impacts he's had on you and the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rena. That was so touching. And your family's lovely. We're so happy to meet you. Zeke, as Aurora and others have mentioned, there spoke so much about his family, his grandchildren. In fact, he worked right down the hall from me, and I would go to try to talk to him about something related to the department or my work, and he would mostly want to talk about his grandchildren, who are about the same age as my children, so I feel like we kind of had that bond. We have several folks who wrote in remembrances and sent videos. So I'm gonna ask Lene Levy-Storms is gonna read a remembrance by Mark Chesler. Professor David Cohen will then read a remembrance by Hillel Schmid, and Professor Amy Ritter-Bush will read a remembrance by John Trotman. And then we will have 2 videos and then open remarks. So, Professor Lene Levy-Storms.
Good morning. I'm honored to have this opportunity to read something on behalf of Dr. Mark Chesler from the University of Michigan. If I may, I just want to make a comment, share something with you that I did not know Zeke very deeply at all, but he was very friendly, and something we shared that probably not many of you did was a wall. Except Ted and I, we share a wall, but I lived in Kalina Glen, and Zeke was my neighbor, not just in the community, but we shared a wall. And as such, he kindly invited me one year to his Christmas party, during which he casually said, "Why don't you apply for a job in our department?" And I promptly responded, "Zeke, I don't have an MSW." And he said, "You don't need one." And the rest is history. I am so grateful for that. And also, as his neighbor, it's been a pleasure to share some times with Zeke's family. Helen and Rena and Glenn and Sarah, and I barely met Rachel. Summer, sorry, yes, sorry. Okay, so with that said, oh, one more thing. He did share with me all this talk about his professional influence and what a great colleague and friend he was. How many of you knew that he actually spent, I don't know the specifics, but he made it clear that he spent considerable time raising his daughters at home. And so I do regret that I did not speak with him more about work-life balance. That would have been more insightful. All right, so now I just want to say that Dr. Mark Schesler is a friend and a professor emeritus of sociology and the program in intergroup relations at the University of Michigan. And again, it is my honor to share his letter. I knew Zeke and have known Helen, Rena, and Rachel for over 40 years. Zeke and I were pals, colleagues, and sometimes collaborators. Together, we explored the ups and downs of Israeli policies, the state of American politics, university joys and hypocrisies, and socially relevant scholarship. Our families occasionally traveled and vacationed together and constantly discussed the puzzle of how to raise and support our daughters. Helen and Joan were central to these conversations, including ones that hypothesized whether large amounts of Wonder Bread could delay adolescent puberty. One memorable trip the two of us took involved a pilgrimage to the sites of former concentration camps in Poland and Czechoslovakia. It was after a social welfare conference in Denmark that we trained through parts of Eastern Europe, quote unquote, visiting Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, and Terezin. At some places we looked and felt, at others we said the Hebrew prayers for the dead, and at other sites we felt the ground we stood on was so evil that to grace it with prayers was impossible. We wept and raged together. Zeke often was reluctant to share his emotions, although on certain matters it was clear that he had a deep well of feelings. Political discussions could surface them. The trip to the camps was another emotional situation. Still another was a joint autobiographical article we wrote that explored our life paths, from families of origin through struggles with childhood illness, our professional